If you've ever sat there looking at your finances, wondering what should my next move be? What should I prioritize? Should I be paying off my debt more aggressively, or should I be saving more for retirement, putting more money in my kids' 529 plan, building up my cash, my emergency fund? Then believe me, you are not alone. Most people that hire me, they do so because they don't know how to prioritize these things, and they're left with these same exact questions. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the financial order of operations, where we will try to tackle this question and go through what you should be thinking, what you should be prioritizing as you go through creating your financial plan. I hope that you find this one helpful. Let's get to it. So truth be told, most people, they just fly by the seat of their pants, right? They have money coming in, they make split decisions as they're going through their finances, like, let me throw a couple $100 over here, a couple $100 over there, and they have no clear and concise plan how to attack all of this stuff. And it's okay. We really weren't taught about this stuff in school, so we learn by trial and error. So I'm going to lay out the order of operations. Anytime I sit down with a new client, if they're hiring me just for like a one-time financial plan, or even if we're going to work together for a long time, this is where I always start, right? It's getting to the priorities straight so that all of our money coming in, that we know exactly what we want to do with it. We have a job, and then we can run projections going forward. How long will it take to get out of debt? How long will it take to build up that emergency fund? How long will it take to accumulate $1 million in my 401k? How long will it take for me to save enough money to send my kid off to college? You want to have everything clear and concise, so then you can automate it and you can have consistency, because that really is the way that you build wealth over time and reach financial freedom. So having a roadmap, it gives you clarity. It takes the guesswork out of it. It gives you an actual plan to reach your goals. All right, so here we go. So step one, the first thing that I always look at, and it's public enemy number one, is high interest rate debt, what I call bad debt. So that is going to be personal loans, right? God forbid, payday loans, credit card debt. If you're paying 20% on anything, I equate that to your house being on fire. You need to put it out before you can move forward. So that has to be the focus, is to get out of that debt, because it's really impossible to build wealth if you're paying somebody 15, 20% on money that you're borrowing, and it just eats up your cash flow. So that is always priority number one. You need to shut everything down until you get out of all of the bad debt. Now, that does not include student loans. If you're paying 4 or 5% on the student loan, we could pay that over time, and that is okay. There might be other priorities that we would rather attack than that. Not everybody is the same, though. Some people don't want to have that debt, and they would rather prioritize it, and we'll make those decisions together. But mortgages, if you have a 3.5, 4% mortgage, to me, paying additional on that, it doesn't make any sense. I would rather save and invest for my future if I've paid off all of my bad debt. So the first step is understanding good debt versus bad debt, and then taking the bad debt and just attacking it with everything that you have. All the money, all the cash flow, everything that you could possibly do, you need to go after that and get it out of your life. Two very popular methods that I talk about all the time are the debt snowball and the debt avalanche. We're not going to get into it in this video. I've done many videos on that in the past, but those are the strategies. Those are the way that you want to attack that bad debt that you have in your life. And part of the plan could be shuffling debt around, trying to refinance debt, get lower rates so you could save interest. But at the end of the day, you need to have a clear, concise plan of how you actually eliminate the debt. All right, and then step number two is to get some money in the bank, right? I always joke around. I always say everybody sleeps better when they have 10 grand in the bank. And I just threw that number out of anywhere because I believe in it. If you have $10,000 in the bank, then you lay a little bit lighter on your pillow at night. But you want to start out somewhere, right? So once you get that bad debt situation figured out, then it's time to start building an emergency fund. And maybe this shares priority with other goals. So once you get a couple $1,000s in the bank, then maybe not all of your positive cash flow goes into the bank, into an emergency fund. Then maybe you start branching out into other priorities and other goals. But the goal has to be to eventually get to the point where you have 1 month, 2 months, 3 months worth of expenses sitting in cash, safe and sound in the bank, earning in the current rate environment 3.5%, 3.75%, where you're getting at least some interest on that money. You could pull from it if you really needed to in case of an emergency, but for the most part, it is there for peace of mind. You're not touching it, right? It's just your emergency fund. That is step number two in the order of operations, right? So no more bad debt, and to have 3 months worth of expenses in the bank, in an emergency fund. In an ideal world, depending on what kind of job you have, if you have job security, then 3 months might be better. If you have uncertainty around your job, or if you have two incomes compared to one income, all these things play a role into how much money you should actually have in an emergency fund. But typical rule of thumb, 3 months to 6 months worth of expenses sitting in the bank, just hanging out there, collecting interest, just for peace of mind. And then step number three is starting to invest for your future. And there are a couple different buckets that fall under this investing for your future, because you're going to have different priorities and we're all going to have different tax situations. So it depends what type of account you want to save for your future, but you need to be investing. For example, if you're going to be retiring 10, 15, 20 years from now, that money needs to be invested for growth in the markets, in the stock market. If you're investing for maybe a child's education and they're getting close, maybe they're only 3, 4, 5 years out, then you want to have a combination of very safe, secure investments in there, like money markets, savings accounts, bonds, things like that, maybe along with some allocation towards stocks. So it all depends on the purpose of the money and the timeline of the money. And I also love to invest in what's called a brokerage account, which is not doesn't have to be for way in the future. It could be used in the next couple of years if you need access to it, right? But it could be for very long down the future. So a brokerage account is not a retirement account. Anybody could open a brokerage account. You can put as much money into it as you want. You could take it out whenever you want. It's taxed differently than retirement accounts, right? You're then dealing with short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains for positions, for securities that you've held for longer than a year. So it's different than a retirement account. And I love having all different types of investment accounts depending on your situation. So this way you have different levers you could pull in retirement, before retirement, whatever the case may be. So as we look at order of operations, for investing for your future, the first one that I always say where your money should go is if you have a company sponsored retirement plan, so like a 401k, where you get an employer match. So say, for example, they match the first 5% of what you put into your 401k, then you need to put in that first 5%. So you're getting the free money that's going into your 401k. But now, should you be putting more in your 401k? And that depends on your personal situation. So if you don't have a ton of money to invest, right? If you just got out of debt or if you're tight on cash flow, then I would rather see you do something like the first 5%, if that's what the match is. So you get the match. And then beyond that, maybe you do something like a Roth IRA. Now, this is going to depend on your income, on your tax brackets, right? But with a Roth IRA, you could open it at Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard. You could contribute in 2025, you could contribute up to $7,000 a year. If you're age 50 or older, then you could do an additional $1,000 into a Roth, so a total of $8,000. But with a Roth IRA, you put after tax money in, and then it grows tax free forever as long as you follow the rules. So to me, this is the best account in the world, all right? Because once you're in retirement, you have access to this money and there are no taxes that are going to be due on it. So it would be great to walk into retirement where you have what we call tax diversification. So that might be pre-tax accounts like a traditional 401k, then also your Roth. You could have Roth 401k, Roth IRA, and then also those brokerage accounts that we just spoke about. So if you have all three of those buckets, pools of money going into retirement, it just gives you many more options in retirement. It makes you more dangerous from a tax standpoint, depending on what tax rates are, because you could pull some money from your traditional accounts and pay taxes on it, hopefully at very low rates. Then you could pull some money from your Roth IRA where it would be completely tax free. And then maybe you pull some money out of a brokerage account as well, where you're getting taxed at long-term capital gains rates. And year by year, you can make these decisions in retirement, like where does it make sense for me to pull my money from? And now with all three of these types of accounts, automation is your friend. Setting it up so that it automatically happens. That's what makes 401ks so powerful, is they come out of your paycheck. You don't even know that it happened. It's just automated, right? And when you increase it, when you get a raise or whatever, it's like you don't even feel it. The money's just going into your 401k and you really don't think about it. Out of sight, out of mind. You could do the same thing with brokerage accounts. You could set it up where it's like, all right, $200 on the 15th of every month just automatically gets sent over and invested in the market. And that's the best way to go ahead and set it up. And then the fourth type of account that we really didn't talk about yet is college savings plan, right? If saving for college is a priority for you, the best thing to do is to open the 529 plan and just get started and start sending money over there. Now, I always say that you should not prioritize this over your retirement. If you're in a situation where either you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have credit card debt, you don't have an emergency fund, you haven't saved for your own retirement yet, you can't be unrealistic and say, all right, I'm going to save, 100 grand in the 529 plan for my kids to go to college. You have to take care of yourself first. So once you are firing on all cylinders, having a 529 plan that you are sending money to every month is a great way to save for college. And it could be where you are sharing priorities, right? Where you're trying to max out your Roth IRA, but you do want to get started with a 529. So you do send a couple $100 over there every month. And I think that is also a great thing to do. But you have to be realistic with how much you want to save for college. You don't want it to take away from your retirement, right? Because you can have student loans, go to less expensive colleges. There are things you could do where if you're in retirement and you don't have the money, then that means you have to work longer, or it means somebody else is going to be taking care of you, and you don't want that to happen. So college savings, it is a priority, but for me, it is lower on the priority list. But I understand as a parent, I have 3 kids. I want to save for them to go to college, right? So I feel guilty if I'm not saving for them. But at the end of the day, it is lower on my priority list. I think to myself, I'll figure it out when we get there. Community college sounds appealing. Lower cost colleges sounds appealing. They could take out some loans, have some skin in the game. I don't need to take all of my excess cash flow and put it in 529 plans so that they could go to some $100,000 a year college. And here I am working till I'm 80 years old. That is not the plan for me. And hopefully it's not the plan for you either. And then step 4 is to protect everything that you have going on. Protect what you're building, protect your family, protect your home, protect your car, right? And what am I talking about here? I'm talking about insurance. Make sure that you have adequate insurance and estate planning, right? So a will, power of attorney, healthcare proxy. These are simple legal documents that everybody should have just in case, if something were to happen. The last thing you want to do is die without a will, where maybe you have family fighting over who's going to take care of your children, things like that. And then with insurance, make sure that you have adequate life insurance, basic term insurance that will replace your income if something, God forbid, were to happen to you, right? If something happens to you, your family is going to be emotionally distraught, right? Life is going to be upended. You don't want them to have to then worry about the finances and be left, in a very, very tough situation if they don't have that money coming in anymore that you were providing. So term life insurance is the best way to replace that, right? It's the lowest cost, it's pure insurance. Hopefully, it's never going to pay out. Hopefully, you will live beyond the term, right? But you need to protect your loved ones just in case the worst were to happen. And then things like homeowners insurance, car insurance, you just want to make sure that you have adequate insurance and that you are covered. I always recommend an umbrella policy as well that covers everything. If you were to get sued, if it was above the liability protection that you have in your homeowners insurance or in your car insurance, that's when an umbrella policy would kick in, and they're not very expensive. You could get, $1 million of umbrella coverage for a couple $100 a year. So I always recommend that as well as being a smart thing to do. And then the last thing, which could also be the first thing, right? I'm not going to even give it a number because it's something that you always have to be doing within these order of operations, all right? And I always call this turning the lights on, and that is tracking your cash flow and your net worth. All right. You should always know what your net worth is. And all it is, it's your assets minus your liabilities. So your assets are all things that you own, right? Things that are yours. So like money that you have in the bank, your retirement accounts, your home. If you own your car, then your car is considered an asset. It has value, right? So you add up all of your assets and then you subtract all the money that you owe to people, all of your liabilities. So that would be like your mortgage or the loan that you might have on your car, or student loans, credit card debt, personal loans. All of that are your liabilities. So you add them all up, you subtract it from your assets, and that is what your net worth is. And you should be tracking your net worth statement at least on an annual basis. Now there's software out there where you can just pull it up and track it, look at it every single day if you want to, right? But you want to be tracking that number. That is your financial scorecard of how you're doing in life. All right. And then beyond your net worth, you need to understand your cash flow. You need to see where your money's going every month. And if things are tight, then obviously the last thing that you should be doing is driving an expensive car with an $800 payment, right? Or putting money into whole life policies where you're paying $800 a month into life insurance when you could just have term life insurance that is going to cover your family in case of the worst happening to you. So you want to keep an eye on your cash flow. Try to keep it, as low as you can, right? So the gap between your monthly income and your monthly expenses, I refer to it as the happy gap, because the wider that margin is, the happier you're going to be in your life. For example, if you're bringing in 10 grand a month and your expenses are 6 grand a month, that gives you a lot of room to be happy. $4,000 a month, that's a lot of money that you could save for your goals and your priorities and have a nice emergency fund and be on strong financial ground. If you're bringing in 10 grand a month and you're spending 11 grand a month, life is hard for you, right? It's very stressful and it's hard to figure that stuff out. And the only way to do it is either increase that income or reduce the monthly expenses. And both of those are not easy things to do. So tracking the cash flow, that's the first step, because you need to know where everything's going. Most people live in the dark. That's why I always talk about turning the lights on in your financial life. All right, everyone, that is it for this one. I hope that you found it helpful. If you would ever like to work with me, go through, create a financial plan, we can spend a couple hours together. I'm happy to do that. Head over to schoolofpersonalfinance.com. I show all the different ways that you could work with me there. I will see you again in the next video. Thanks.